The Soybean School on realagriculture.com is brought to you by Pride Seeds, Aragon LQ Pre-Harvest Weed Control, and Cruiser Max Vibrance Beans.
Hey, Kara Oosterhuis here with realagriculture.com. I am back here today with another soybean school, and I have here with me Daryl Dimitruk, who is the Executive Director with Manitoba Pulse and Soybean Growers. How's it going today?
Great, Kara.
So we're now sitting here, it's the end of the year, and we're kind of taking some time to, as many of us kind of reflect across the year, we also reflect across the growing season. Do you want to talk about what some of the things you guys, you're located in the Carberry, Manitoba area. Do you want to kind of talk about how the soybean season went this year?
Right. So, well, province-wide, Kara, the soybean crop in 2020, when we look back, I think we can call it a successful year. We had reasonable yields, especially compared to 2019. And then those yields have been built upon since harvest by an uptick in the market. So those that grew soybeans in Manitoba in 2020 did reasonably well.
That's awesome. What sort of diseases were you guys seeing? Like, obviously, there's a bunch of different diseases, but were there any that were highlighted this year?
That is one of the reasons I think that we had a solid yield, if not a bin buster. With the weather that we had, the diseases that we're constantly looking for, things like Phytophthora root rot, they didn't seem to materialize very much. So what we had was a year that was the rainfall was still actually rather low. We had a lot of places that had only 65 to 85% of their average annual growing season precipitation, but we had good, strong soil moisture in storage. So the crop took advantage of that, but with the generally lower amount of rainfall, the environment just wasn't conducive to a lot of foliar disease development. And as I said, those root diseases seemed to stay at bay. So overall, it was not a big year for any particular disease.
Which is obviously a good thing, but that often goes hand in hand with a drier year. What was moisture like this year?
It was on the dry side precipitation wise, but we had a good supply, a good stock of soil moisture going into the spring. So that carried us through. One interesting thing about soybeans that we've learned in the last 18 years here in Manitoba, like other parts of the world, the lesson is that an August rain makes a world of difference for soybeans. And so what we saw, sure enough, this year was even places that got a couple of millimeters, a tenth here, a tenth there, made a significant difference in the yields that they recorded.
So, looking at some of the insects that maybe came across this year, is there anything that stood out and anything that kind of overwinters that producers should be looking out for next year?
Not in particular. The thing about soybeans is that I wouldn't call them an easy crop to grow, but they've proven to be a relatively simple crop to grow. So we're always on the lookout for soybean aphids. That's something that growers should scout for every year. Of course, this year Manitoba had its share of grasshoppers, like a lot of places did.
Mhm.
The biggest thing we think is in the springtime at the seedling stage is look for seed corn maggot and cutworm and wireworms. Those are the things that can set a crop back early on, and soybeans may not be able to compensate like some other crops. Those are the first ones out of the gate that we advise growers to look for.
Okay, awesome. And what sort of other messages? I know it's still early, but what sort of messages are you wanting to get out to producers kind of heading into that 2020 season or 2021 season?
Well, we're aware that there appears to be another increase in interest in soybeans based on some seed sales that we've heard of, and we're advising growers to pay attention to some of the basics that we've been communicating over the last number of years. That is variety selection. Make sure that you're growing a variety that matures in your area. That's the first step. Don't rush with seeding, but don't delay as well. Try and get the crop seeded. We always say no earlier than the 2 weeks after the last frost. Bear that in mind. And then pay attention to those early season establishment issues. Remember that things like nitrogen fertility are not a concern with soybeans, as they are a legume and manufacture their own nitrogen. But things like phosphorus and a good balance of those nutrients are required for a soybean crop. We grow soybeans unlike anywhere in the world. So if you ask about crop rotation, for example, anywhere in the world other than in eastern prairies of Canada, they would say rotate your soybeans with corn, because that's all they do. Here we're rotating it with up to 5 or 6 different crops. So we're learning a lot still about the agronomy of soybeans, simply because we're growing them in a much more complex system. So really at this point, we're encouraging growers to follow the basics of variety selection, seeding date. It's often depending on the soil you're in, but it's sometimes a good idea to roll your soil so that you push down any stones. Soybeans tend to have pods lower down on the stem, and in order to prevent any rock damage, you want to get those stones into the ground, much like growing peas and other legumes like pulses. So those are some of the basics to keep in mind once you get going. Other than that, soybeans are a relatively simple crop to grow. You don't need any special equipment or any kind of adjustments like that. And so what you're doing for your canola or your cereals at some level is what you do for your soybeans. Most people have the equipment and the practices down well, and just pay attention to the basics.
As you said, there are lots of producers right now. The market for soybeans is looking really great right now, and people are buying that seed. Can you dive a bit more into the importance of actually following that rotation and the agronomic value it can provide?
We're still gathering a lot of data. We've got a lot of research investment in rotation. So far as we can tell, again, it's sort of the traditional system of not putting soybeans back to back, having a couple of years at least between them. But we're still gathering information on that. Probably more important for growers to consider is, as I said, variety and field selection. One of the things that soybeans are prone to is iron deficiency chlorosis. So highly calcareous soil create problems for soybeans early in their growing season. So selecting fields that may not have as high a carbonate level is important, as well as choose varieties that have some resistance to IDC. And if those varieties are also the ones that will mature in your area, pay attention to the label. If they're labeled as 00 or 000, those are typically what we're growing in Manitoba in terms of a maturity classification. And if you're seeding at the right time, be it after canola or after wheat, after a cereal, in eastern Manitoba, a lot of soybeans do go in with corn after corn. Those all work. And it's some of these other things that will determine really the ultimate success of the crop. You've got the right variety, seeded at the right date, and into the right field.
Awesome. Okay. Thank you very much, Daryl, for your time. And I look forward to talking to you and seeing how the actual 2021 season turns out.
Thank you.